Okay, got that set up and it's 1 o'clock. Let me share the screen and we will get right into it. It's not a long chapter. So we should get through it quite swiftly. Okay. Can you all see this? Can you see the screen now?
Yeah.
Got it.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So it's the laws of Shegagot. That means those sacrifices that are brought for inadvertent transgressions. And we're up to chapter 10. And here we're going to discuss one of the unique types of this sin offering, which is called the korban ole v'yored. Ole means that which goes up and then which comes down. And what that really means is that in certain instances, as opposed to what we had previously, a chatat kavua, where there was a set animal that had to be brought as the sin offering for the particular transgressions that we've spoken about, there's a group of transgressions for which it will depend on the financial capabilities of the individual as to what the actual offering will be. If they can afford it, it will be an animal, as we'll see. If not, it can be replaced by a bird offering. And if they can't even afford that, it will be replaced by a meal offering. Okay, so the first halacha gives us the 6 individuals, known as the types of transgressions or circumstances where one would be required to bring a chatat, but this is a chatat ole v'yored, meaning that they will bring it according to their financial status and standing. So there are 6 individuals who are commanded to bring an adjustable guilt offering. They are one who becomes purified from tzaraat, a woman who gives birth, a person who takes an oath denying the knowledge of testimony. It's what we call shvuat edut. And now this is what's interesting. We had 2 examples of this yesterday, where you would bring a sin offering for something that you did it, whether you did it intentionally or inadvertently. Yesterday we learned about someone who had stolen, shvuas gezel, and shivcha charufa, which were 2 instances where even if you did a particular sin with full intention, with full knowledge, you would be liable for this sin offering. Similarly, if somebody denies knowing testimony, which means as follows, a shvuat endus means like this: if somebody calls you to court and says, I know that you saw such and such take place, and your testimony will enable me to extract repayment. And you say, well, sorry, I don't know anything about it. You swear that you don't know anything about it. So that's even if you did it intentionally, you would bring a chatas ole v'yored, and one who takes a false shvuas bitui inadvertently. Now this is inadvertent. Now you'll remember that when we learned the laws of oaths, there are different types of promises, oaths that a person can make, which would be considered false. One of them is a shvuas bitui. A shvuas bitui means when you swear to something that either happened in the past or in the future, or was done in the past or will be done in the future, and it's something that's permissible according to the Torah, and it's something that you have the capacity to do. But you didn't do it, or you don't really intend to do it, and you're just swearing falsely. Okay, that's called the shvuas bitui. Now he says, what happens if somebody made a shvuas bitui inadvertently? So you swore that you did something yesterday because you thought it was yesterday, really it was a different day. So you, or whatever, you didn't realize you were swearing, you swore inadvertently, but the content was what we call a shvuas bitui. So in all of these cases, and the next 2, an impure person who partook of consecrated food inadvertently, or an impure person who entered the temple inadvertently, in all of these cases, you would bring a korban ole v'yored, or you would be liable for a korban ole v'yored. And again, that means you would bring a sacrifice according to your financial means. So let's go through them. Second halacha. With regard to a sacrifice brought by a woman after childbirth, if she's wealthy, she brings a sheep in its first year. That's the ideal korban as a burnt offering, and a young dove or a turtle dove for a sin offering. If she does not have the means, she can't afford the animal, her obligation for a sacrifice is reduced. It's yored, and she must bring merely 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, and one is then the burnt offering, and the other is the chatas, the sin offering. Now, even if she has the means to bring a sheep, listen to this. This is interesting. So she can afford the actual animal, but she does not have the means to bring its accompanying offerings. Remember, every animal offering also had together with it, it's an accompanying meal offering and oil and the wine and so on and the sachim. So she can afford the animal, but not those added things. So then she would, again, she's considered a poor person for the purpose of this korban, and she would be able to then reduce her offering to that of the 2 turtle doves or the young doves. Halacha 3, when a person afflicted by tzarat becomes purified. Remember, the person is tzarat is that what we often translate as leprosy, but it wasn't leprosy. It was a spiritual disease manifesting some type of skin disorder. And once a person is relieved of tzarat, they have to bring us a number of korbanot. One of those is a sin offering, and for the mitzvah, it's an ole v'yored. So he becomes a figure of tzaras, and he's purified. He must bring 3 animals as sacrifices: 2 sheep, 1 as a burnt offering, 1 as a guilt offering, and a ewe as a sin offering. And if he does not have the means, he must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. 1 is the burnt offering, 1 is the sin offering. That's the chatat olav yored, and a sheep as a guilt offering. So that one has to still be the intended animal. But for the chatas, basically that part which we're talking about now, it's olav yored because he can't afford it. He can bring a bird instead of the animal. Halacha 4, one who takes a false shvua concerning testimony, inadvertently takes a false shvua spitu. So if someone swears that I don't know information that is critical for this case, and he really does know, so that's a shvuas edus that he has said he has lied on, okay? Or he said a shvuas spitu, he swore to something that he did or could do, and it's permissible, but he inadvertently made a mistake about it. So these are all the subsequent cases from the first halacha, right? Or inadvertently enters the temple or partakes of consecrated food while in a state of ritual impurity. So then he must bring, what's the ideal korban? The ideal korban is a ewe, female lamb, or a she-goat or a female goat. Just like the chatas kavua. Those are, right, the chatas kavua, the set sin offering was a female animal. So in these instances, also that would be the ideal. But if he does not have the means, he can't afford it, he must bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves, 1 as a burnt offering, 1 as a sin offering. If he can't even afford that, he should bring 1/10 of an ephah of flour. This is a meal offering, and this is referred to as the meal offering of the sinner. The manner in which it is offered has already been described in Hilchos Maaseh Karbanot. We already spoke about this, how the meal offering is brought, what it must contain, and so on and so forth. Halacha 5. All of these sacrifices are explicitly mentioned in the Torah. In other words, each of these transgressions that we spoke about, it explicitly says in the Torah that for such a korban you would bring a korban olav yored, right? And that these bring them to bring that they're obligated to bring them, with the exception of an impure person who inadvertently entered the temple or partook of consecrated food. In other words, what the Rambam is now going to list, the explicit verses with regard to 4 out of the 6 that we mentioned. The last 2, somebody who ate pure consecrated food or walked into the temple while impure. Inadvertently, we don't have an explicit verse, but the Rambam is going to justify that. Nonetheless, that is also a transgression for which one will bring in korban olav yored. What are the verses for the other 4? It's written in Leviticus 5:1-5, when a soul will sin and hear a voice of adjuration, or a soul that will touch any pure thing, or a soul that will take an oath. Okay, this is one we're talking about, explicitly stating it with his lips, and one will be guilty with regard to one of these. So it goes on to say that he would have to bring that korban, right? According to, each of these verses is, right, referring to one of those sins that we spoke about. And in each case, the verse continues where the ... is to say that you would bring a korban of olav yored. But we've quoted 4 verses and not the other 2 instances. So he says, now, according to oral tradition, it was taught that the obligation for an impure person to bring a sacrifice refers to a person who became impure and then entered the temple or partook of consecrated food without knowing of the prohibition. Although this interpretation was conveyed by the oral Torah, it is as if it was stated explicitly. For the Torah explicitly obligated an impure person who partook of consecrated food or entered the temple for karet. Right? Remember, we said that it's those, when are you obligated for a chatas, when transgressing it intentionally, the sin, the consequence is karet. and now that you're doing it inadvertently, or so you would have to bring this offering. And with regard to an impure person who partakes of consecrated food, it says like this: and a soul that will partake of meat from a peace offering brought to Hashem while he is impure, also there it uses the word, he will be cut off, which is karet. And with regard to one who enters the temple, it says, and the soul shall be cut off from the congregation because he made the sanctuary of Hashem impure. So since the Torah obligated one who entered the temple or partook of consecrated food while impure to karet, it's understood that here it stated the sacrifice that must be brought because of the inadvertent violation of these prohibitions. And that's how we go. So it doesn't mention the transgression and explicitly the korban, we deduce this as he's just explained. Halacha 6, whenever a woman is obligated to bring a sacrifice, her husband is obligated to bring it on her behalf. Now this is interesting. So if he is poor, he brings the offering of a poor person. That means irrespective of his wife has independent wealth. Because he's bringing it on her behalf and he's poor, he can bring a poor offering. If he's wealthy, he brings a sacrifice of a wealthy person on her behalf, even if she independently is poor. Okay? He brings what he can afford. However, a person may bring an offering of a poor person on behalf of his son, his daughter, his servant, and his maidservant, and have them partake of the offerings. That means even if the person himself is wealthy. Okay? I'm not clear exactly why the difference, what the justification is, but it's interesting to note that. But clearly, in the other examples, that person clearly doesn't really have money of their own. And what we're saying is you can bring, therefore, a poor man's offering, even if you yourself happen to be wealthy. But when it's a husband or wife, it's different. They have to bring what they can afford. A king and an anointed priest must bring the same sacrifices for a false oath regarding testimony and false shuas, and for entering the temple or partaking of sacrificial food while richly impure as others. In other words, all those things that could apply to the Kohen or the king of the 6 that we've been talking about, they would bring the same korban, they'd bring the same offering. Now this is unique. In these areas where you only are obligated a korban olav yored, the king or the anointed priest, the high priest, would bring the same korban, unlike those sins for which you are obligated a chatas kavua, where for everybody else it's a she, an ewe, or a shegagot. For the king it would be a male, and for the kohen it would actually be a bull, if I'm not mistaken. So they have their own unique animal that they have to bring for a chatas kavua, but for this category of transgressions, where one would be obligated for a korban olev yored, the king and the high priest are treated the same as everybody else. And he goes and says, for the Torah did not distinguish between sacrifices brought by a king and an anointed priest and ordinary individuals, except with regard to those commandments, which one is obligated to bring a fixed sin offering, and for their inadvertent transgression, as we explained. With regard to an adjustable guilt offering, by contrast, all are equal. So that's the ones we're talking about here, and they would be equal. We already explained in Hilchos Shvuot the laws of taking an oath, when one is liable for a sacrifice for a false oath concerning testimony and a false shvuas bitui, and when one is exempt. In which instances he will be liable for many sacrifices according to the number of oaths he took, and in which instances he would be liable for only one sacrifice. So the sacrifice is an olav yored, but there will be more details, and that's dealt with in the laws of Shvuot. And the Rambam says in Hilchos Mechusei Kapara, which is the next section of the Rambam's laws, he says, I will explain there which instances a woman who gave birth and a person becoming purified from saras will be liable for many sacrifices, and which instances they will be liable for only one sacrifice. Okay, so those details we fleshed out in the section of law. It's more relevant to it. Here he's just simply giving us what are the options for a korban olav yored, but exactly what how many you would be obligated for, that's dealt with in those specific areas of halacha. Halacha 8, with regard to all sins that one must bring a sacrifice, whether you transgress willfully or inadvertently, if a person violates due to factors under duress, he is exempt from bringing a sacrifice. At the beginning, we gave an example, right? A shvuas eidim. If somebody swears that he doesn't have critical information for a claimant to be able to claim something in court, and he's lying, so he said he would bring a korban chatas olav yored, whether he did that intentionally or unintentionally. So you chayav for a korban. So in this case, and in the 2 examples that we spoke about yesterday, what the Rambam is saying is that if you did it in those areas where you are obligated, whether you did it inadvertently or whether you did it intentionally, if you did it under duress, you would not be obligated to bring the korban. Okay? And he says, it's needless to say that this would apply with regard to other sins for which one is only liable when he transgresses inadvertently. If he sins under duress, certainly he would be exempt. Halacha 9, when a person set aside money for a ewe. Okay, so now you've set aside money that you want to buy it for the sin offering, and then you need that money for another purpose. You may bring a she-goat and transfer the holiness of the money to the she-goat and draw benefit from the money. In other words, what he's saying is basically you have one animal that's worth 100, but now you've set aside 100, and to buy a ewe is going to cost you 100, but you need some of that money. And if you buy a she-goat, it's only going to cost you 50. So he says what you can do is you can take a she-goat and you can say, I'm taking this she-goat in place of that 100, and you'll be able to then use the leftover money, as it were. And the same would be if he set aside money for a she-goat and purchase a ewe, he may derive benefit from the money. But basically what he's talking about, it depends what's going on in the market. Is the she-goat more expensive currently or the ewe more expensive currently? But one way or another, even if you've got enough money for the more expensive, but right now you need some of that money, you can choose to use the less expensive one, and the remainder of the money is now redeemed, as it were, and you can use it for your own needs. Halacha 10, when a person set aside money for an animal and make him poor, so you are obligated in this korban. You set aside money for it, but now you're no longer obligated to bring an animal because you are now objectively poor. So what should he do? He should take 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves and transfer the holiness of the money to them. Then he may benefit from the remainder. In other words, he'll say, instead of taking that $100 and buying an animal, which he would have been obligated for while he was wealthy, he can just take 2 birds, and he'll say, I'm bringing these birds as the korban, and now the money is now free for him to use for his own needs. If one set aside money for young doves or turtle doves and became poor, he should take 1/10 of an ephah and transfer the holiness of the money to it. Then he may benefit from the money. Conversely, if he was poor and set aside money for 1/10 of an ephah and became wealthier, he should add to that amount and bring fowl. If he set aside money for a fowl and became wealthy, he should add to it a bit and bring a ewe or she-goat. So that's what we're seeing. If your circumstances change, even if you set aside something, you've got to elevate your korban offering to when you're actually going to bring it. Even a person was fit to inherit money. So interestingly, he says like this: even if a person was fit to inherit money and the testator was on his deathbed. So it means like this: let's say guy's poor, but he's got a very wealthy uncle, and now he's obligated to bring a korban, and he's about to bring a meal offering because that's all he can afford. But everybody knows the next door, his wealthy uncle, who has written him into the will, and he's going to become a wealthy man very soon, right? Nonetheless, he brings the korban according to his current status, not according to the expected status, even though it's pretty much guaranteed. Okay, that's basically what he's saying. Even if a person was fit to inherit money and the testator was on his deathbed, he is still considered as poor until the testator dies and he inherits his estate. So if he sets it aside and brings it before he actually gets the money, even though the money's on the way, will be on the way, that's what he has to do. Just sets aside the poorer korban, and that's fine. Halacha 11, when a wealthy person sets aside a ewe or a she-goat and it contracted a blemish, and then he became poor. So now that, before we were talking about if you set aside money. So we said that you can bring a korban in place of that money, which is worth less, and then the money is yours and you can use the extra money, right? But what if you actually set aside the actual animal? But now the animal got a disqualifying blemish on it. And you happen to be poor now. So what you can do is you can sell the animal because you can't bring it as a korban anyway. And he can just bring a fowl with the proceeds of the sale, and obviously you'll have some money left over. If he set aside a fowl and it was disqualified, he may not bring 1/10 of an ephah of meal with the proceeds of a sale. It may not be sold since there is no concept of redeeming a fowl. So this has got to do with the laws of what you can transfer or redeem when it comes to different animals that were set aside for the altar. When it comes to birds, there is no concept of that type of transfer, of redeeming it. And so he can't trade it out with meal in its stead, but you could trade out birds for an animal. Halacha 12, when a person set aside a tenth of an ephah and then became wealthy, before the meal was consecrated by placing it in the sacred utensil, it is like all other meal offerings, and you redeem it and eat it. Once it has been consecrated in a sacred utensil, it cannot be redeemed. Okay, it can't be redeemed, but he also can't fulfill his obligation with it because now he's wealthy. So what has to happen? Instead, it should be left overnight and then taken to the place where the sacrifice is burned. Left overnight, that becomes inherently disqualified and it gets put aside. And he would obviously then still have to bring his animal offering now because now he's a wealthy guy. Final halacha: when a wealthy person set aside a pair of doves to be sold with the intent of using the proceeds of the sale as part of the funds for a ewe or a shegagot, and then became poor, he may bring this pair of doves, even though they were consecrated only for their worth, and thus originally disqualified as sacrifices. Okay, so you put aside the birds, but you didn't say, I'm going to bring these birds as an offering. You said, I want to sell these birds because from the proceeds, I'm actually going to buy an animal. Now, when you set aside something not for the altar, but for its worth, you can't bring that on the altar. But he's saying in this instance, you would be able to now use those because they fit what's required of you. And he says, why are they not disqualified forever? In other words, why don't we say that because when you designated it for its worth, and when it was designated for its worth, you're not allowed to bring it as a korban. Why don't we just say it stays in that status? You can't bring it as a korban. He says because when they were disqualified originally, they were not disqualified in an ultimate sense, right? Because they were only disqualified until they were sold. And once they were sold, then they could be used by the next person on the altar. For this pair of doves is now fit for sacrifice, and therefore, because it wasn't disqualified completely, but it was only temporarily disqualified, and for this individual now, his circumstances dictate that this is a good korban for him, so he can just switch it. He can say that we can use it on the altar. When a poor person brings the sacrifice of a rich person, he fulfills his obligation. Conversely, when a rich person brings the sacrifice of a poor person, he does not fulfill his obligation. And I think it sounds pretty straightforward and obvious, but I think there's a surprise. If I remember correctly, I haven't looked at yesterday's Perek chapter, and there's a surprising halacha next to it. I think it's tomorrow's chapter, about what happens if somebody wealthy wants to bring a sacrifice on behalf of someone poor, or vice versa. I'll leave it for when it comes up in the halacha. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive when we get there. Okay, let's try to get through it's 4 questions. Let's see how we score. So first question, can you see it on the screen? I think I have to make it a drop smaller so you can see the answers as well, right? For which of the following does one not bring an adjustable guilt offering? An impure person who entered the temple inadvertently, one who becomes purified from Sara'at, one who inadvertently ate noisai. Which one is not discussed in our chapter?
The 3.
3 is
Sounds
correct.
like number three. Yeah.
Okay. The first 2 are examples of people those are the ones we're talking about. If a woman after childbirth cannot afford to bring the proper sacrifice she is obligated to, what should she offer instead? So again, the proper sacrifice ideally would be an animal. So he says, what are the options? 2 turtle doves and 2 young doves. 2 turtle doves as burnt offerings and the 2 young doves as sin offerings, or 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. One is a burnt offering, one is a sin offering. Third option, 2 turtle doves or 2 young doves. One is a burnt offering, one is a sin offering. You got to just pay attention there. It's a little bit of a trick, the wording.
I wasn't on, but it sounds like number 2.
Okay, so you got to pay attention because we're talking about, I hope I'm right. Okay, the point is it's not the and, it's either or, and one is going to be a burnt offering. The question is, what's the second one going to be? The second one is going to be the sin offering. That's what we're talking about, right? The korban olah v'yared. What is the meal offering of a sinner and who brings it? It's the meal offering of a sota woman. It is the meal offering that is brought together with 2 turtle doves by the one who cannot afford a shegagot or ewe for their guilt offering. It is a meal offering that is brought by one who cannot afford 2 doves or turtle doves for their guilt offering. What do you want?
Number 3.
Okay. Yeah, because that's the third option, right? This is the Ola V'Yored. If you can afford it, you animal. If you can't, birds. If you can't, then the meal offering. This becomes the meal of the sinner. If a person set aside money for an animal for his adjustable guilt offering, sacrifice, and then he became poor, may he bring turtle doves instead? So the question is either yes, and he should transfer the holiness of the money to them, or no. So he set aside money, remember? He was going to buy an animal. Now the question is, what can he do? Is he stuck with the money, or can he transfer the holiness?
1.
Yes, yeah.
Number 1.
Number 1 is correct, right? He can bring the birds, and they basically replace his offering, and now the money is available for him to use the rest of it as he sees. Okay,
Yeah.
Shegagot.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Good to
Thanks,
see
Rabbi.
you.
Sorry,
Have a beautiful week forward.
sorry, I joined very late.
Glad you made it.
I was busy.
Good to see you,
thank
David.
you.
Glad you made it. Okay, Colton,
Nice to
everyone.
see you.
John,
Thanks,
Jack.
Rabbi. Bye.